Welcome to the Horns of Light Chronicles. Peter Burbulys chronicles his family story, prophecy, and testimony. God's story unfolds from his grandfather in Lithuania, Nazi Germany, the Russian Revolution, to Ronald Reagan and the fall of the Berlin Wall, the gospel spreading across to Eastern Europe, how God called Peter to Petra, Jordan, and so much more as prophecy and testimonies unfold. And now the Horns of Light Chronicles. Horns of Light, I'm so excited to hear the continuation of this story, and so without much further ado, here's Peter Burbulys. When we left our hero, your grandfather had gone into Germany, and there was a mess, right?
Yeah, basically where we kind of left off last time was he had been conscripted to dig ditches at the front lines of the German front with Russia. And my grandfather, he had to leave behind at the train yard, kind of taken suddenly to do this work. And he had one morning woken up, and everybody had, all the Nazi soldiers were gone, and didn't really know what to do. So a lot of the workers that were doing the ditch digging left. And then the Nazis came back after they realized that the Russians hadn't broken through the lines, the very front lines. And a guy held a gun to my grandfather's head, a young man, accusing him of letting everybody go. And fortunately, by the grace of God, some older people stepped in, some older soldiers, and said, there's no way he could have done this, and the Lord spared his life. So to kind of continue on from that point, that same situation developed one more time, as kind of God speaks oftentimes through patterns in our lives. And again, he woke up one morning and all the soldiers were gone, and it was just the workers. And this time he realized that he had to leave. So knowing that his family was out at the railroad yard, he found some railroad tracks and just started walking. Unfortunately, little did he know that at the time that he was walking right into the front lines and into the Russian front. So as he was walking, a Russian soldier shouts out to him and starts speaking in Russian, and my grandfather spoke many languages, and he was able to answer him back in Russian. And then the Russian soldier, as they continued the conversation, he said, "You're very fortunate. We were given orders to shoot first and ask questions later. If I was obeying orders, I would have killed you." And so basically then he pointed my grandfather, a Russian soldier, which is kind of a miracle in itself, points my grandfather back in the opposite direction and tells him that's where, that's the direction he should be going towards if he's trying to get back to his family in Germany. So basically he makes it back. He had told my grandmother to go to the manager of that train yard, which was a friend that he had known from, I guess, school when he was in Germany, an acquaintance. And so he reunited with my grandmother, with his wife and 3 children. And then from my memory, he talked to that individual and just kind of encouraged him to leave with them, because to everybody at that point in time, the promised land was the American quadrant. The war had kind of was coming to a close, maybe it had come fully to a close at this point. And the big rush was the Russians were coming, and you did not want to be stuck in Russian-occupied territory of Germany. You wanted to be on the American side. So the American area was the promised land that they were going to leave from this house and try and get to, and they try and convince this man to come with. And he didn't, because he had a farm and everything there. His whole life was there. So he decided to stay, and little did he know that kind of that grasping on to things and holding on to things would cost him dearly, as that became part of East Germany. So he had to go from that point, and in the end basically live under Russian occupation until the fall of the Berlin Wall. So my grandfather, he did set my grandfather up with a cart because my father had TB at this time and he couldn't walk. So they had to kind of cart my dad and his brothers and my grandmother and grandfather to try and make it to the American occupied part of Germany. And as they're going, I mean, bridges are blown up. They have to barter with silverware that they have to get a guy who's manning a raft to get him over one river, and other bridges, they're told the bridge is going to blow at any moment, so they're rushing to get across. And there's just kind of this, I don't know, Lord of the Rings type of picture of them trying to make it into American territory, and they do. God graciously grants them that passage, and they're able to make it into American occupied Germany. And in that area, they're put in a displaced persons camp. My dad has tuberculosis really bad at this point, and he is sent off to a German hospital where he's put in a body cast and has to just kind of live in that body cast away from the family in this hospital for a year. And back then they believed very much in getting healthy meant living outdoors, so he'd basically be in a cot in the cold winter of Germany with blankets. And that was kind of his life. As my grandfather, I kind of sent a picture there of one of the, basically what at these displaced persons camps, in one of these small buildings that was kind of military barrack kind of thing. 3 families would be in there separated by a cloth. That was kind of their wall. So my grandfather at this point is kind of trying to figure out what to do. So with my dad having tuberculosis, he cannot get entry into America. He runs into one of the bureaucratic people granting that occupation, and he wants a bribe for my grandfather, and my grandfather, being a minister, refuses to give that bribe. So basically he has to rethink plans. And my dad kind of describes this time as going from kind of hell to heaven. My grandfather, through his connections in the church, in the Methodist Church, one of the higher-ups just says, there's this reunification act that's going on in America. If you go and you're there for a year and you give your son a chance to heal up and let your wife stay with him, then you guys will likely be able to reunify back in the United States. So my grandfather sees that as a solid plan. So he leaves to the United States with his 2 sons, and he sends my grandmother to the Alps of Switzerland, and my dad describes it as just they're basically given a place to stay at this beautiful resort. So from kind of leaving the depths of war and all the ruin of that, they're in this beautiful place up in the Swiss Alps, and that's where he spends his year recovering. And through that reunification act, my grandfather then sends for both of them to come to the United States, and that's kind of a story in and of itself. They arrive in the United States, and they're put immediately into Ellis Island as their paperwork is processed. Because of my dad's formerly having tuberculosis, they put him into a cell, and they were going to separate him from my grandmother because they wanted the, men in one and women in the other. So my grandmother just pleads with them, and they allow my dad to stay with my grandmother, and it's kind of in the cell on Ellis Island. And my dad remembers kind of crawling up to look out the window through the bars, and he sees the Statue of Liberty. And so that was just a powerful moment for him to see that. So in the midst of this, my grandmother notices that they're just in there way too long. I forget if it was a few weeks, and she just kind of feels like something's wrong. So she just tells my dad to pretend that he's sick, and to just start crying. So he just pretends that he's really sick, and he's just crying, and the guards and basically get them to the doctor. And then at the doctor, they realized that their paperwork was misplaced and they weren't really even accounted for in the system. So then they're able to reunify with my grandfather in Boston. And my grandfather, new to the country, he valued education very much, and he decided to go on a search through the United States and just kind of try and find out where a good place to stay would be, and as far as jobs and higher education systems and stuff like that. And so he chooses Chicago, which at that time had several universities in the city, and that's where he decides to go and raise his family at that point. He's working as a union baker in a bread factory kind of a thing, and basically he's kind of struggling. He's also pastor of the church. Kind of another parallel here to our meeting is he is able to rent some space at Raymond Chapel Baptist Church in Chicago, and that's where he's able to minister to a Lithuanian congregation. He was offered an American congregation by the bishop, but his heart was really still for Lithuanians. So he pastored a small congregation while he was working full time, and just did a lot of help as far as trying to get them. What happened during this time is reparations started beginning to take place. So Germany was having to pay people whose property was stolen or confiscated. And so he would help people process the paperwork to get their checks from the German government as a result of the atrocities that were committed to their families. So that was kind of his time. He's pastoring this church, and he kind of goes through a bit of a kind of a what's the purpose of life situation as a result of the call that the Lord had on his life. He was never really allowed, I guess, to stray too far. So he was just one day kind of saying to God, what's the purpose of my life? I'm working as a baker in a bread factory, and just kind of having that conversation with the Lord. And that same day, my grandmother, my dad is driving my grandmother, and they get in an accident, and she flies through the windshield head first. And then my grandfather goes to see her in the hospital, and he's hit by a bus, and he's hospitalized. And as he's sitting there in the hospital, kind of the Lord speaks to him and says, if I didn't have plans and purposes for your life still to be fulfilled, then your life would be over. And he just kind of told him that he still had plans and purposes that he had for him to fulfill. So from that point, we go into kind of that 1960s to 1980s period of his life. The Lord just starts putting a burden and kind of what's going on in Lithuania, Russian occupied, Cold War, that whole situation is going on in the world, and just very little communication with the Western world. So in the 1960s and 80s, the Lord really puts on his heart that he's to work on getting the Bible translated, because in Lithuania they didn't really have one Bible translation that translated many books, but not all into one complete Bible. So he starts working on that. He decides to raise funds and try and get kind of a Christian guy that he had known who was going to an Ivy League school, and just very, very brilliant when it came to the original biblical languages. So he starts raising support for him to live 5 years completely without having to do anything but work on translating the Bible. 5 years goes by. He raises money for this guy to just kind of live. 5 years goes by, no Bible. So he, raises for another 5 years. 10 years goes by, no Bible. And he kind of comes to the conclusion that the guy has just kind of taken the money and run, kind of a deal. So he starts to feel incredibly betrayed by the situation. And during this time, he's also kind of working on, my grandfather was working on Bible commentaries, and he had a letter that he'd send to Lithuania, a kind of evangelism letter that he'd send to the church, to the Christian church there, the underground church. And as he was sending these letters and these kind of monthly, I don't know if it was monthly, but these periodicals that he would write up, the U.S. postmaster came to his house and said, you can't be sending this type of information into Lithuania. It's creating problems with the Russian government, so you need to stop sending this.
Wow,
this type of stuff.
I hate to jump in here, Pete, but again, we've run out of time for this particular episode, so I know you're all sitting on the edge of your seat like I am. Like, what happened with this Bible translation, and how is God going to use that? We're going to find out more about that on the next episode of Horns of Light. Thanks again, Pete.
Thank you.